So you're telling me the stuff I do in my free time for fun is what you want me to do as a job? Yeah. And you're going to pay me to do this? Yeah. And he goes, yes. I was like, where do I sign? Where do I sign? My first program was, line 10, print Connor on the screen, or, or I am cool, or I am great, or whatever. And then just sit there in amazement that your own name would come up on a television screen. I'm happy to admit I was a terrible DBA. Absolutely terrible. And funnily enough, I didn't think that. I thought I was a good DBA. There's an old saying in IT, they say you should always document your work, all your work, because what happens if you get hit by a bus? Well, as luck would have it, poor Peter was walking across the road at lunchtime and got struck by a bus.
Now the world don't move to the beat of just one drum. What might be right?
You sit closest to Peter, so you're now the DBA. So it was literally simply based on where the chairs were in the office. He said, congratulations, you're now the DBA. And that's how I pivoted from development to more of a DBA role. We thought, great. So we saw the agenda for his talk, and it was 20 things you're probably doing wrong with your Oracle database. We were doing 19 out of 20 things wrong. I think there was one thing we were doing correct, and everything else, we were doing wrong. And that was a fantastic.
Okay.
And so, that's how I first got to meet Tom Kite back in the day, in the mid-90s, because he was active on the news groups, and I was desperately trying to improve my knowledge because I'd had this humbling experience with Dave Ensel. And I started hearing about the ACE program because a number of European friends were becoming ACEs. Tim Hall, oraclebase.com, Doug Burns, who was very popular in the parallel query space back in those days. A number of good friends who I was keeping in regular touch with had become ACEs, and so I started to hear about the ACE program. I'm leaving the call. That's it. No, just kidding.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Golden Talk session. Today, I'm very happy to have with me Connor McDonald. He is an Oracle developer advocate, a global speaker, and one of the most recognized voices in the Oracle community. Connor is very known for making the databases fun and easy to understand, and you probably know him from the Askton Office Hours with Chris Saxon, which we already have here in the Golden Talks. And let's start with this amazing talk. Connor, it's a pleasure to have you with me in the Golden Talk session. Welcome.
Hi, Jilson. Glad to be here. Absolutely thrilled. It's the end of my day. I've just finished my dinner, so it's good to sit here with a full tummy and to chat with a tech colleague.
Okay, thank you very much. And to people that is watching you, just sharing that I'm now in Brazil, so it's morning, and Connor is in Australia, which is night. And thank you very much to have availability and be part of this Golden Talk session with us today.
No problems. It's a pleasure.
Okay, and let's start our talking with a big question. And I know that this question you have heard many times in the last month. So when Oracle 23 AI is going to be released on-premise?
Well, I would love your listeners to think, and I would encourage your listeners to think that I walk in those lofty, high circles up at the very highest executive levels in Oracle where these decisions are made. I would love your users to think that. That would be totally untrue. I do not walk in those circles, and therefore I have no information as to when 23 AI on-prem will be released. But if listeners want to think that, yes, Connor McDonald knows this and is secretly not divulging it, that would be great, be wonderful for my ego. But yes, unfortunately, those decisions are made up at the Larry Ellison level. I was about to say at the Safra Katz level as well, but we've had some shuffling going around at the top of Oracle in the news the last couple of days. But I will say one thing, when it comes to dates, I think your listeners should keep an eye out for November 5. Now, I must admit, that's got nothing to do with Oracle 23AI. That's my mother's birthday. But if you could send her a shout out, that would be lovely. You can hit me up on Twitter. That's the only date I can probably give you of any meaningful note. But yeah, for all I know, maybe there'll be an announcement at AI World. Don't take that as a prediction. That's just my guess. I know we do lots of big announcements at AI World, but who knows? Who knows? I'm as frustrated as many other listeners are. I would love to get my hands on 23 AI on-prem because you've probably seen some of my videos. I'm super keen about the features in it, so I'd love to have our customers, everywhere being able to get access to it.
Okay, so hoping in the Oracle AI world, we're going to have some news about that, right?
I hope so, but yeah, I'm not party to such information.
Okay, cool. And you are working with Oracle for many years, more than 25 years, a little bit more than that. And during this journey, you had a lot of presentations, blog posting, videos, many things. But here in the Golden Talks, we usually want to know a little bit about the person behind the professional and about the career and how everything happened from the beginning. So, can you share with us how your journey, how you started with IT until you got Oracle? And after that, we want to know how you developed your career as a developer and DBA and so on.
Okay, so my IT career started when I was about 10 years old. I'm not sure how long you want me to talk, but this could take some time. But I'll go back to the very start. Hopefully, you'll find this entertaining. I was at home, and my father came home from an evening at a bar that he every Friday night he used to go to catch up with his friends at the bar. And he came home with a little device that looked much like a school lunchbox. It was just a sort of a little plastic device with some buttons on it. And he literally said to me that his friend Ken had been given this by a colleague at work. Ken didn't know what it was. He gave it to my father, and my father gave it to me and said, "Do you want to have a play with it?" Unbeknown to me, it was a computer for people of my vintage may remember it, called a Sinclair ZX80. And computers, and I use the term very loosely in those days, were things that basically the unit was similar to what you'd see if you went to a fast food restaurant, the cashier's till. Like, there's no keyboard, it's just sort of a rubber pad in which you press in certain places for the keys. And the output basically was a coaxial cable that went into your TV antenna slot. So there was no monitors in those days. You plugged this computer into the monitor, the antenna section of your TV. And the Sinclair ZX80 had 1 kilobyte of RAM. And when you turned it on, it just popped up the word OK. And that was it. And we didn't really know what else to do with it. I just stood there staring at the screen that said the words OK on it. And as I typed in some keys, every time you pressed a key, the entire screen would refresh because it was just static. And that was a Sinclair ZX80 computer. I then went down my local newsagent, and you could buy magazines for Sinclair ZX80s where you would come home and you would literally type in the basic program to do things like tic-tac-toe or very simple quiz questions, etc. There was one program you could type in where it would ask you the capital cities of countries around the world. But all of this you laboriously typed in yourself in basic programming. And when you turn the Sinclair ZX80 off at the end of the day, it was all lost. There was no storage. It was just a little 1K of RAM, and that's all it did. But funnily enough, is like so many people that start with basic programming, what my first program was, line 10, print Connor on the screen, or or I am cool, or I am great, or whatever, and then just sit there in amazement that your own name would come up on a television screen. And I was blown away. This was, it's all black and white. I think there were 40 characters by 25 was the resolution of the screen. That was all. There was no graphics. It was just characters. But I was hooked. I thought, wow, this is super cool. The fact that I could, get my television to show me something, even though it's just plain characters, that I could program myself. And so that led to, I then badgered my father in the years to come for a Commodore VIC-20, which was mind-blowing because it was color. It was the first, I think it had 16 colors. That was the first color device I had, still only character-based stuff. And then came a Commodore VIC-20 expansion pack with 8K of RAM, and that let you actually play the first little computer games. And then finally, a Commodore 64 when I was maybe about 14, which was the first device I ever had that actually had a tape drive. So whatever you typed in and built during the day, you could actually store and reuse the next day. And that was, breathtaking for a computer, for a kid playing with computers, the fact that you didn't have to type in everything from the magazine every single day. And so, so literally, I'm one of those fortunate people that probably from my early teens, I had a pretty good idea what I wanted to do in my career. And funnily enough, just to divert slightly, I thought that everyone was like this. I was always thought that everyone knew what they wanted to do from such an early age. And it was only when my sister, who did a nursing degree when she got out of high school and didn't like that, did a psychology degree after that, didn't like that, did a sociology degree, didn't like that, and eventually ended up becoming a lawyer and fell in love with it. It was only, when she was in her mid-30s, I discovered that actually it's not like it's not common that everyone knows what they want to do at such an early age. So I was very, very fortunate in that sense. And that's what kickstarted my interest in computing.
Right. So you started too teenagers, as a kid. And after some years that you realized that you was the only one that liked all of this stuff.
That's right. So yeah, that was, and so that literally got me, there wasn't computing in high school. That wasn't something you could do. But in high school, our school had one computer, an Apple II from back in the day. And the way it worked is if you got the best maths marks in the weekly quiz, you were allowed to go into the computer room and have an hour on the school computer. And so I studied my mathematics very hard. I wasn't particularly interested in mathematics, but I studied very hard so I could always hopefully get the best marks at the end of the week in order to get into the to play with the computer for 1 hour. So, and that then the first real proper study of computing came when I went to university, where you could actually do a computer science unit. And so that's how I got that. That takes me to university years, where I actually studied computer science and mathematics as double degrees.
Nice. So the beginning was with about programming and mathematics, but database and Oracle until this period, I understand that you didn't have too much contact. And when you started looking for the database and Oracle after this period of programming, high school, and joining the university?
Well, funnily enough, Oracle didn't exist when I was at university. So there was that problem. Or it may have just been in existence, but certainly not in Australia. That was around the probably Oracle 3 or 4 time frame. So it's a long time ago. When I went to university, they didn't have a database unit until my final year of university. And funnily enough, I hadn't heard really of databases because they were fairly new on the block in terms of relational databases. The world was still using hierarchical databases on mainframes. And so I had a choice of 2 units in my final year at university in my honors year, and that was to do my thesis on databases or on robotics. And as you can imagine, I chose robotics because I thought it was going to be more interesting. So I never actually studied databases as they were in relational databases at college. I studied hierarchical databases because one of the units you could do in university was a COBOL programming unit, because in those days the world was full of COBOL programmers. And when I graduated, that was actually my first job. I was a COBOL programmer using IMS databases, which are hierarchical databases. It's funny how JSON's now everyone's cup of tea, which is a hierarchical format. But in those days, databases were hierarchical, generally running on IBM mainframes. So I was a mainframe COBOL programmer. And probably our first realization of Oracle was, like all big companies, due to cost cutting. We had a huge real estate of mainframe systems, and we were looking at rolling out I was working for a mining company. We were looking at rolling out this huge fleet of mining software to manage things like the trucks and the things that dig out of the ground and where the ore was going and et cetera. So we were looking at buying an enormous package from a vendor. And they said, well, this package runs on IBM DB2, which was probably the first commercial available database, a relational database on an IBM mainframe, which dominated the world. And so because DB2 was new and IBM mainframes generally hadn't processed relational databases in those days, DB2 was very cool, but it was very, very a big performance drain on your mainframe software. And mainframes in those days, you didn't actually own them typically. You typically rented them, you leased them. So we paid basically on what we call MIPS, millions of instructions per second. You paid for CPU, you rented CPU, and you rented storage from a provider. So we were paying, back in those days, I think it was something like $5,000 per MIP per month for CPU, and something $1,000 per gigabyte per month, because a gigabyte was a big deal in those days. And so this project that this company rolled out, exactly, this project this company rolled out was massively expensive. And then the project went in and was successful, but then our company said, do you have any other platforms in which your software runs? And they said, well, we're looking at this fairly new player in the hardware market, and that is Sun Microsystems. There's this player called Sun. They've got this operating system that is fairly new to commercial players. It's very common in the college and academic market, and that's called Unix. We're looking at porting our software to that, and we'll be running on a relational database called Oracle. And so that was this company's first dabble into Oracle. They actually didn't go with it straight away. They said, well, we're unsure about this. Most big companies don't want to be a pioneer. They don't want to be the first because of the risk factor. But that was our first inkling that there was this product called Oracle. And so our company said, well, we should start looking at this Unix thing, this Unix relational database thing, and see if it's got any legs. Because if we could migrate some of our big systems off mainframe, we could save lots of money. As I said, it's always about the money.
Okay, and in this period, maybe there is one point that's interesting, because you was working only with mainframe, and you are using probably TSO, the graphical interface of the mainframe, and it is really different from Unix, the prompt and command line and so on. So it was also a different paradigm to change from mainframe to the Unix. And you didn't get like a warden or, oh my God, I needed to learn everything with a system that was mentioned that was too new for that period, that people was like uh, uh, trying to understand and learn from the beginning everything.
Exactly. And big companies, as you know, are generally risk averse. And so this company, BHP, it's a big mining company, still exists today in Australia, one of its biggest companies. We said, well, let's try a little project in relational database. And we went out to tender. We said, we're going to do a small project, probably with Unix. And we went out to all the database players that existed at the time. So IBM came in because they had just ported their DB2 to Unix. They said, yeah, we'd like to bid for that work. Oracle came in, gave us a presentation. Ingres, who were popular in those days, came in, gave us a presentation. Infomix, a company called Gupta, which had a database called SQLBase. So all these companies were very keen because they knew if they could get a foot in the door with this large Australian mining company, then obviously that would be a very good relationship to have going forward. So we did prototyping with all these different database vendors. And this was back in the sort of the early Oracle 6 days. And we were looking for databases that also would provide some GUI front ends, because GUI was just starting to become a thing. It wasn't so much on PCs because Windows wasn't out yet. We might have had Windows 2 maybe back in those days. But on Unix systems, GUIs were pretty mature and sophisticated. So we were looking for this mix. And after all the prototyping and seeing what Oracle can offer, we didn't go with Oracle. Yeah, it's funny. We had this meeting around the room, and we all the developers sat around, and we got asked what did we like, and most of us liked the Gupta product because it was quite mature in terms of its GUI, and we were naive because we were all mainframe programmers. We didn't realize that there was a difference between what you saw as a GUI and the quality of the database behind it. We just viewed it as this is some new platform that's not a mainframe. So most of us liked Gupta or SQLBase, and the other half of us liked Ingres. I was an Ingres fan because they had a thing called Ingres 4GL, which was a GUI front end. And almost no one wanted Oracle, to be honest. And so we had all this discussion around the room, and then the project manager for the entire prototyping exercise said, okay, thank you for all your inputs. We're going with Oracle. And we were shocked. We didn't know why. And to this day, I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe he was on a kickback. We have no idea. But he decided Oracle. And funnily enough, when you look at where all those other vendors are today, that was a very fortuitous decision because Ingres disappeared, Infomix disappeared, IBM DB2 is still around, but not so much on Unix. It's an AIX player now. But it's so funny how out of all those platforms, and I'm happy to admit that we made as developers we were just impressed by the flashing lights. Our project manager actually, I don't know why, but he definitely got it right. We went with Oracle. Nice. And then we spent the next year doing Oracle training courses. And as you said, we had to learn how Unix worked. We had to learn the concept that it wasn't, like you said, TSO on a mainframe where everything gets typed in advance and you hit enter. It's all stateless, which funnily enough, I suppose mirrors the internet applications of today. But all the things about GUIs and Unix and shell scripting and everything we had to learn from scratch. And that was our first little dabble into Oracle. So.
Nice. This is an amazing story. And before we go in deep about this Oracle journey that you started after that, I have one question that it's related to Australia that you talk a little bit, because Australia it's in a place that it's far away from the other countries, and as you are living there for many years and from the beginning of the Oracle and these technologies, what do you think about the things that it's arriving in Australia? Did this take too much time, this change from Oracle? And how was your feeling that period? Start to learn a technology which was really fresh and new.
It was both exciting and frustrating. The best way to describe that was...
and how the community and the things are developing in Australia, as it's a country that it's far away from the others.
Certainly in those days, everything was probably a year or two behind in terms of technology, simply because the internet wasn't around. And so, literally, if you wanted to get software from an overseas company like Oracle, like it arrived, on a plane. Like the tapes and the software arrived on a flight. Okay. And so, Australia adoption of technology was always a little bit behind, unless the technology was built in Australia itself. I remember that the company I worked for, a mining company, they built some software where they had cameras on train tracks, And as trains rolled by, they would actually measure the size of the brakes on the trains to see when they needed replacing. And I remember that was one of those things that got exported to the world as being a technology invented in Australia and exported outwards. But certainly in Australia, when we were generally adopting technology that had been invented elsewhere, we were always a little bit behind in that sense, because it just took, we were so isolated from the rest of the world. Today, not so much, because nowadays, the line between countries is well and truly blurred, thanks to the joy of the internet. But yeah, certainly back in those days, we would hear about companies doing things before we would actually go ahead and do them. So
okay, nice, cool. And going back to the Oracle beginning, so this period you started to learning, understand, and knowing Oracle. So how was the process? Did you get in love with Oracle programming, or did you don't like it because it was used to work with mainframe and things like that? How was this?
As I said, one of the things that you struggle with is a saying I got taught many, many years ago, possibly related to this time of my life, but possibly not, was someone said, don't fight the product because the product will fight you back. And the tools we were using in those days, we were using Forms 3 and eventually Forms 4, as we were an alpha customer for their Forms GUI product, Forms 4, and Oracle 6 and crossing over into Oracle 7. And there were some problems because these were early versions of the product. So there was some fault from Oracle there in the sense that we had, it's basically very early release software. So there were, numerous bugs, etc. But also I want to, defend Oracle, not just because I'm an Oracle employee. We were naive in the sense that we were building applications and trying to make them work and run like the mainframe ones used to, because that's all we knew as sort of programmers. And so we would generally, Oracle Forms used to have this wonderful, still does have this lovely sort of two-moded operation, I think called query by example, and then data maintenance. There's these two modes of operation. And as non-modal people in the mainframe days, we were constantly trying to defeat that concept. We were constantly trying to fight Forms to make it run like a mainframe screen would. And therefore, our immaturity with the products also led us to build generally bad applications in the early days. But that frustration actually led to a benefit. I think mistakenly took out some of those frustrations on Oracle. We were complaining about the quality of their products. And I think we probably found a lot more bugs in the products because we were, doing very sort of outlier niche usage of the product because we weren't familiar with it. We were trying to, as I said, bend it into a mainframe style product. So we found lots of edge cases in the products because I would imagine the people that wrote the original software weren't expecting people to try and use it in this way. So it's both of our fault, but we were unaware of this. We were ignorant. And so we were venting our frustrations on Oracle back in those days. And as a result, a few of us got invited to go to the Oracle offices in the eastern states in Australia, and then eventually the Oracle offices in San Francisco to provide feedback on these products. So Oracle, some of the managers claimed that it was just Oracle trying to buy us off, but I don't believe that. We had some really great meetings with the Oracle developers. This is back in the maybe early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. We had some fantastic meetings where we provided some feedback as to what we were trying to do and why it wasn't working, and they would provide feedback as to, well, they hadn't thought of this, or they said that's definitely not the way you should be using the product. But it was a really good actually two-way interchange. And then we came back to Australia, and that was when we probably started having a better understanding of how the tools worked, how the database worked, etc. And that's probably the moment at which I switched from being a developer more into a DBA. But that in itself is a story of some coincidence, if you'll bear with me. In those days, Unix servers were small things. They looked like a desktop PC. Generally, they weren't that large. And so our Unix landscape wasn't in a computer room. It was actually just spread across the office where we worked. And we had a contract database administrator, someone that Oracle had brought in, and they were managing the database because we were all just developers. We were writing SQL and Oracle Forms and the like. One day, Peter, his name was, he takes his lunch break, and there's an old saying in IT. They say you should always document your work, all your work, because what happens if you get hit by a bus? Well, as luck would have it, poor Peter was walking across the road at lunchtime and got struck by a bus. Thankfully,
oh my God, really?
Thankfully, no bad injuries, but he did have to take an extended break from work. He wasn't killed or anything, but he did have an extended break from work. And my manager at the time came out of his office and literally looked around and said, "You sit closest to Peter, so you're now the DBA." So it was literally simply based on where the chairs were in the office. He said, "Congratulations, you're now the DBA."
You're
And
promoted now.
that's right, and that's how I pivoted from development to more of a DBA role, because poor Peter
Okay.
got hit by a bus and disappeared from work for a while. So that was a bit of a baptism of fire, but that's how I started learning how to work with the database purely as opposed to a developer. I will give a shout out. We had an Oracle guy came in and mentored me during that time. His name was Wesley Kowalski, and I think he still works for Oracle. I think I looked him up the other day. He's been at Oracle now like almost 40 years. So I think he still works for Oracle. So Wesley, if you're watching, thank you for all that stewardship back in the late 80s and early 90s.
Nice. And hope Peter gets better after this happening. And you became a DBA from the night from day with this situation, and with your knowledge of developing, how was your how was your beginning with a DBA? Did you use it, your knowledge as a developer? Do you think that the developer skills help the DBA? And share with us a little bit about that.
I think in the years down the line, being a developer and being a DBA is very, very useful. But at the time, I'm happy to admit I was a terrible DBA. Absolutely terrible. And
Really? Yeah.
and funnily enough, I didn't think that. I thought I was a good DBA. And that's, you mentioned Australia before. That's one of the fundamental problems, especially when you're working for a very large company in Australia, which I was. You develop a sense of ego in the sense that you feel that, well, I'm working for this massive company. We've deployed some projects and they seem to be working. Therefore, I must be a competent database professional. And it's because there's no feedback from external loops to actually say that's not the case. And it was in about this time frame that, because we'd now been using Oracle for a little bit of time, and a number of other companies in Perth where I live were using Oracle, the first semblance of the Australian Oracle user group started, Ausug, and they're having their conference later this year. There's another shameless plug. But yeah, they literally started to have some meetups. And they reached out to us and they said, can you come do some talks? And we would get up there and we'd talk about our forms experience and our database experiences, etc., and the normal things that we do at user groups. And a few months after that, they said, we've got this fantastic event planned. There's a gentleman named Dave Ensor, who was a worldwide database expert. At the time, he used to work for a company called BMC, which I think no longer exists. He was based in Europe. He was an English fellow. He passed away some years ago, but he was known as a legend in the Oracle database community. And Australian User Group we've got this incredible get. He's going to come and do an Australian tour, funded by us, and he's going to come talk about databases. And we thought, great. So we saw the agenda for his talk, and it was 20 things you're probably doing wrong with your Oracle database. And as I said, our big egos, oops, I just banged my light. We strolled into the user group meeting thinking that he's going to be talking about all these things that novices and the like will probably be doing silly things. So he went through the 20 things people typically do wrong, and seriously, I ticked off 19 of them. We were doing 19 out of 20 things wrong. I think there was one thing we were doing correct, and everything else we were doing wrong. And that was a fantastic because it's one of those things where you couldn't even question him, because you knew that this guy had built enormously big systems with customers all over the world. What's the cliche? I say, he'd written the book on performance. He knew so much about the database. He'd worked for Oracle at some point in the past as well. And so that was a great humbling experience. And at the time, it was unpleasant to be sitting there and get just 19 sort of dents to your ego. But it was the perfect time for it. Because if I'd not been in that talk, I would have happily continued on thinking I was doing a good job as a DBA, because there was no feedback loop. So it was great to get that experience that told it, no, you need to actually start learning more and researching more and finding out what's going on. And also, that was when the internet, not the internet really, things like Deja News and Usenet were just starting to come into their own. So there were ways of actually reaching out with news groups to places outside. No one was blogging or anything like that, and there wasn't really websites, but there was things like Usenet and the like that you could actually go and actually start participating on forums. And so based on that, I thought, man, I better start reaching out to the world as opposed to staying in my little bubble here, just to try and teach myself and improve myself. And fun enough is through that, this is probably the mid 90s now, I would go out and I would ask questions on the Usenet news groups, and there were some common people that would typically respond with answers. One of them was Tom Kite, who actually wasn't. He was working for the Oracle.
Oh my God, Tom
and,
Kite.
and Jonathan Lewis and a few others. And so names at the time, I had no idea, who these people were. I just knew that these people tended to answer a lot of questions, and their responses were fairly, they were very methodical and very logically weighed out. And so, I learned this incredible amount from these people who I only knew over Usenet. I'd never seen them. There was no internet. And so, that's how I first got to meet Tom Kite back in the day, back in the mid 90s, because he was active on the news groups, and I was desperately trying to improve my knowledge because I'd had this humbling experience with Dave Ensor.
Really nice. And see, guys, that is watching us participate in the conference, in the community, can make you learn a lot of things and meet amazing people, right, Connor?
Exactly. And that's why people often ask me, they say, why are you so passionate about user groups? And I literally owe my entire career to user groups. I go to a user group meeting, and that's how I learn, meet Dave Ensor. From Dave Ensor, I go to Usenet, and that's how I meet people like Tom Kite. And just to round off that list of personalities, several years, this is probably 10 years after that, a company, I can't remember their name, they held a competition for DBAs around the world. And if you won, you got to go to Open World at the time. And that, a fully funded trip, flights and hotel and everything. And so I entered this competition and was fortunate enough to win it. This is, I don't know, maybe 1999 or so, somewhere, it might be 2000. And so I got to Open World. But the other part of the prize was you got to have a meal with Dave Ensor and Tom Kite, because they were the two judges. And so it was this hilarious sort of thing where I managed to win this thing, and they did it was blind judging. And so I go to this meal, and they go, okay, Tom, Dave, this is the person that's won the thing competition. And I go, hi, my name's Connor McDonald. And they go, I know you. You're the guy from the Usenet. Tom says you're the guy from Usenet, and Dave Ensor says I remember you from that user group meeting many years ago. So it was a great way of sort of bringing that whole sort of circle to a close. And I'm still great friends with Tom to this day. I don't see him that often because he lives in the US, but and Dave Ensor used to be very popular at the various conferences around the world. And as I said, he ended up getting out of technology and I think becoming a lawyer. But sadly he passed away several years ago. But it was just a nice way of closing off that story.
Nice. And talk about communities and conferences. This is probably your beginning in participation in the conferences. And you said one of the main topics that you started to participate in the conference. And can you share with us, after all of these years, the things that you learned participating in so many conferences, in going many different countries, knowing a lot of people, learning a lot? Share us a little bit about this experience. I have noted here that you mentioned more than 1,800 presentations. Oh my God, it's a lot.
Yes, I have to admit, I love giving talks, and almost as a continuation of the previous stories, and also as an endorsement of why conferences and user groups and contributing is going to transform your own career. Toward the end of the 90s, the Y2K bug was going on, and I'm fortunate enough that I have a EU passport. My father was Irish, and so my wife at the time and I, we could both work in Europe. So we went, we'll go to Europe because there's lots of work at the moment. And because I sort of, I'll say, electronically met Jonathan Lewis, when I moved to Europe and I started working in Europe, I went to one of his seminars. Went to one of his seminars, which was, once again, a user group sort of style sponsored event. Met some people. I ended up sitting next to a person named Mogens Norgaard, who's a Danish fellow. He used to run Oracle support through a lot of Europe, but he'd since formed his own company. But he then said, well, why don't you come along to our Danish event? So I went along to that, met a whole lot of other people. And through that, I ended up speaking at that event in sort of the years that followed after that. And then toward the end of all that period of time when I was in the UK, I was getting ready to go back home to Australia. And the UK user group said, would you like to do a talk at our event before you go home? So I did a talk there. And because I knew I was leaving, I thought I could do something a little bit wild and sort of controversial. And it didn't really matter because I wasn't going to be staying in Europe. So I did a talk with lots of different props. We had beer on the stage representing, I don't know, segments in a database. I can't remember the specifics, but we did all sorts of strange things. We were, throwing beers out to the audience. We had ceramic toys that we smashed with a hammer representing fragmentation, all sorts of silly games. But it left an impression on the audience, and I had a lot of fun. But that helped me establish even more contacts in the UK community. There was a dear friend of mine who sadly passed away, Graham Gilbert, who used to run the database SIG in the UK. He constantly gave me contacts and customers to speak through in the UK, even once I've gone back to Australia. So it's funny how I tell anyone that's involved in a tech space that they should get involved in a community, whether it's through conferences, whether it's through user group meetups, whether it's through just participating on forums, because it's tremendously enjoyable, because you're literally making friends and partnerships and relationships that'll last you an entire career, literally, and beyond. I have many Oracle friends that have since retired, and I still keep in touch with them regularly. I still follow them on Facebook, see what they're doing. You make friendships just by being involved with them and having those non-technical relationships with them. But it also serves as a tremendous boost to your career. I would argue that the vast majority of contracts I had, I was a freelance consultant for sort of a big chunk of the time before I joined Oracle. A lot of those gigs were made because you knew someone who knew someone who knew someone that was like, oh, yes, we need someone to come in who's a specialist at this. I know this guy named Connor. He could probably help. So the ability to guide your own career, to find a path through the things that you love doing, also comes from going to user group events, having those relationships with other people. I know it's a cliche nowadays to say networking, work on your networking, but putting aside the buzzwords, just actually having interpersonal relationships is not just about building friendships. It actually builds your IT career as well.
Yes, really nice. This is a big tip that everyone that is watching you should have, because being the conference, as Connor said, it's a big opportunity to you connect with other people, and many opportunities comes after that, right? And still talking about the conferences, when the ACE program entered in this journey?
I was familiar with the ACE program while I was still in Europe. I think I'll tell you, I'm getting my timing right. I'd just gone back to Australia, because I think the ACE program started around about 2005. So I'd just gone back to Australia. And I started hearing about the ACE program because a number of European friends were becoming ACEs. Tim Hall, oraclebase.com, Doug Burns, who was very popular in the parallel query space back in those days. A number of good friends who I was keeping in regular touch with had become ACEs. And so I started to hear about the ACE program. Back in those days, I think it was Lillian Frank, who I think is now as Lillian Busniak. Funny enough, she's just got back in on the ODTUG board. So she's done full circle and come back into the conference and community thing. But back in those, I think she and a woman named Victoria Lira both worked at Oracle, and they ran the program. And so I was, in those days, I think there was just ACEs. ACE directors came later. But by the time I got made an ACE, there were also ACE directors, but I got made an ACE. I can't remember who nominated me, to be honest. I feel bad now. My apologies to whoever nominated me back in the day. But I got nominated to be an ACE, and was fortunate enough to be involved in that, mainly because I was still continuing to go to as many conferences and community events as I could. It was non-trivial, the expense from Australia, because it was done on my own dime back in those days. But yeah, you do your best. And funnily enough is, a funny story from the ACE program was, I remember I went to an ACE event, might have been at an open world in San Francisco, and having come from Australia, a lot of the European people I knew weren't there because it was a big travel to go to San Francisco, but there was a lot of American ACEs there, none of which I'd ever met. And I'd never met the ACE coordinators, Lillian and Vicky, because whenever they used to do any kind of things in terms of like make videos and stuff or have conference calls, because this was the predecessors to Zoom and the like, it was always in the middle of the night for me, so I very rarely attend these things. So I didn't really know these people, and I felt a bit sort of isolated, even though you're in a community. And I remember I saw Lillian being basically being sort of spoken to very, very nastily by someone in this restaurant. I don't know if they were an ACE or whether they were a staff member. Someone was just talking nastily to someone who I knew was an ACE coordinator. And so I went over and I said, don't we have a meeting right now? And sort of, tried to rescue her from the situation. And Lillian said, if you ever need anything from the ACE program, please let us know. And so once again, it was a nice little sort of, we built a friendship there. And I saw Lillian this year at ODTUG. And so once again, it's a friendship that's lasted the test of time. But that's how I got into the ACE program. And then over time, as I kept doing more and more conference work, I was fortunate enough to become an ACE director.
Nice. It's a big journey. and a lot of contributions. And Connor, tell us, where do you find inspiration to do all of your work with the community and the content that you create until nowadays? Where does inspiration come from?
For me, before I joined Oracle, I would, as I said, I was doing a lot of freelance consulting work. So customers would get me in for short-term contracts, maybe a month or 2 months, something like that. And normally to try and get, maybe either projects back on track or at the start of a project. A case in point, I worked at a company here in Western Australia. I won't name them because there's probably all sorts of anonymity rules. But we had a group of developers there, all very competent. And I remember asking them, I said, well, what's your Oracle database experience? And they all said, oh, we haven't worked with Oracle before. And I went, oh, so what other databases had you worked with? And they had never worked with a database. This was a project being done in C++. And so they went and got a whole stack of very, very smart C++ programmers, but they'd been doing things like process level control, monitoring instruments, the kind of thing that you get data, look at it and throw it away. They hadn't done anything in terms of persistence. And so they quickly realized in this project that they'd built this project on the platform of an Oracle database, and they had no Oracle database experience, development experience. They had DBAs, but no one who actually could do Oracle database development. So I was asked to come in and do some mentoring. But that was typical of the kind of assignments I would often do, where I would constantly have people coming in and sort of ask me questions, and I'd be trying to mentor them and trying to help them and grow, and at the same time trying to make the project succeed. And what I found when, during that period of time was, it was less about the knowledge I had, but more about the ability to give it to people. So don't get me wrong, I love just putting my head down and playing around with the features and trying to explore and find out new stuff about technology, like most IT geeks do. But what I found in when I was sort of in retrospect, when I was looking at these consultancy gigs I had, it wasn't the fact that of getting that knowledge. That probably the most fun part was, giving it to people, giving it to other colleagues. In one particular customer, I remember this guy was a C# programmer, and he was having a problem with latency in one of his applications. And when we had a look at it, it was because it was incredibly network chatty. To do a simple task, it was going back and forth to the database, thousands of times. And we spent an afternoon showing him Peel SQL, so he could call a Peel SQL program. It would do all the work on the database, not particularly efficiently, still doing lots of different little tiny SQL calls. But the fact that it was being done on the database in Peel SQL, he was blown away. And I'll give him huge amounts of credit for that, because it's tough to be a expert in one particular language, C#, and yet go, yes, I'll use Peel SQL, makes sense in this particular use case. I'm not sure I'm as good as that. I'm very much a database bigot. I'm often like, let's do it in Peel SQL and not anything else. Maybe it's not the best option. But he, so things like seeing people have light bulb moments, seeing people have revelations, seeing people pick up knowledge, I found more interesting, more engaging to me personally than the actual having of the knowledge itself. And so that's where I thought, well, if I ever get a job, well, no, let me take a back step. That's why, even though I had a job, I would spend my spare time doing things like blogging. I wasn't making videos in those days, but I'd be blogging, trying to go to user group events, trying to go to conferences, because that's how I sort of, it's a selfish thing. That's how I sort of, got my kicks. I knew that if I want to get a nice buzz out of thing, that was more of a buzz than just having the knowledge itself. It was more fun disseminating it. That's why in 2015, when Stephen Feuerstein was looking for resources to work at Oracle, I remember my first chat with him. He goes, yeah, so the kind of things we're looking at doing is getting a lot of engagement with developers and DBAs, building a lot of content, speaking at conferences. And I said to him, so you're telling me the stuff I do in my free time for fun is what you want me to do as a job? Yeah. And you're going to pay me to do this? Yeah. And he goes, yes. So I was like, where do I sign? And so